Hi, everybody. All right, got a few people joining the waiting. We got to let in from the waiting room here. Let's see. All right. And I'm going to stop my screen share here. All right, it looks like we're all logged in. Welcome, everybody, to our first Friday program of 2022. I'm Carol Easterly, one of the museum program coordinators here at the Kentucky Historical Society. Our building is actually closed today because we got a bit of snow here overnight. And so I'm doing the work from home thing again. So you just heard my dog loudly drinking out of her bowl. Sorry about that. My husband's trying to get things quieted down there. But I am so excited to welcome you today. I'm really excited about all of the programs that we've got lined up so far for 2022. And we're starting things off with a bang with Dr. Milteer. So I'm looking forward especially to the program today. But just a few reminders before we get started. I think we're all pretty familiar with good old Zoom etiquette by this point, but just please keep your microphones on mute throughout the program, just so we avoid any more noise like my dog interrupting us. And let Jody in here. Please feel free to keep your camera on if you'd like to. It's nice to see your faces smiling back, but you're welcome to keep your camera off though as well. And of course, just treat everybody with respect in terms of comments and questions. You can certainly ask questions and make comments throughout the program. You'll just want to use the chat feature to do that little conversation bubble icon down at the bottom of your screen. I do also want to let you know about a few upcoming events that we have happening at KHS tomorrow. Very exciting. You can join us hopefully for a virtual workshop on finding your Kentucky ancestors. It's called Roots 101. And that is being put on by the rock star superhero staff of our research library here at KHS. If you've ever been interested in sort of getting started with genealogy, learning more about your family's history in Kentucky, they can help you out. They're going to be covering a variety of topics that you will want to find out about to help you get started in that process in that workshop tomorrow. It's from 2 to 4 p.m. on Zoom. I believe you can still sign up. So if you visit history.ky.gov/events, you can still get signed up for that workshop. And of course, next month, we will have another First Friday event on February 4th. And our topic is going to be the narcotic farm, which many of you probably, if you're Kentuckians, you might have heard of it here and there. It was one of the first sort of federal drug treatment facilities in the country, and it was in Lexington from 1935 to 1975. And KHS is home to a very significant collection about the history of that place. And the author and filmmakers who produced a documentary about it back in 2008, as well as a book that's recently been re-released by the University Press of Kentucky. They will be joining us to share about their work. And I will pop up a link to the documentary in the chat. It's free on Vimeo. You can watch it anytime. So you can do that before our event. And here's our friend Julie Kemper. All right. Now, I'm, as I mentioned, very excited to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Warren Milteer. He is joining us, I believe from Virginia, but he normally is in North Carolina, where he teaches at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And prior to that, he did some teaching as well at the University of South Carolina and Virginia Tech as well. He earned his master's at UNC Greensboro, where he's now teaching, and his PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His recently published book that we'll be discussing today is Beyond Slavery's Shadow, People of Color in the South. In 2020, he also published North Carolina's Free People of Color, 1715 to 1885. So he's been very busy doing a lot of writing, and has also published quite a few journal articles as well in the Journal of Social History, as well as the North Carolina Historical Review. They've given him a couple of awards for those great journal articles. So I'm quite sure that Stephanie Lang, if she hasn't already, is going to be hardcore recruiting you to write something for the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society. So we'll look forward to that. All right, so without further ado, please take it away, Dr. Milteer.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. Can everybody see that okay? Great. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about my book, Beyond Slavery Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. I wanted to describe what I'm trying to get at, my main points in the book, and I also want to go through the book's organization, give you a little bit of context about how the book came about. So first, what I want to do is just read a little bit from the introduction of the book, and then I'll try to explain its significance to you. So in the introduction, I discuss the experience of a free man of color named Amariah Reed. And so I write that over the course of nearly 80 years, Amariah Reed lived out a life that was typical of many men of his generation in the South. Born a subject of the British Crown around 1762 in Aspen County, Virginia, by age 16, Reed had enlisted in the effort to overthrow British power in Virginia and several other colonies. After participating in various skirmishes against British forces, Reed was present for the surrender of Lord Cornwallis at Yorktown. Following the war, Reed returned to Nansemond County, settling down on an 80-acre tract with his growing family by the early 1800s. Reed's 80 acres eventually became the inheritance of his children, who would continue to prosper from the foundations laid by their father. Yet Amariah Reed also stood apart as a man who was born free in a time when most other people of color in the future U.S. South were born enslaved. Unlike the majority of people termed, quote, colored, in his community, Reed could and did hold title to personal and real property. He could work for himself, provide for his family, and keep his wages without interference from a white master. In the courts of Virginia, he could sue and be sued. As a free person of color, however, he was also subjected to an increasing number of restrictions and forms of legal discrimination. Since the time of his birth, Virginia law prevented him from enjoying some of the civil rights possessed by his white male neighbors, including the right to vote and the ability to hold public office. When Reed decided to spend the rest of his life with Betsy Skeeter, Virginia law prohibited them from marrying because he was, quote unquote, colored and she was, quote unquote, white. By the time of his death, the state had passed laws that prohibited Reed from traveling freely between Virginia and other localities, required him to obtain a license in order to own a gun, and demanded he register with county officials in order to receive documents proving his free status. Reed was wedged in the precarious position of being both free and yet a person of color. And so the experience that Reed had, this contest between being a free person who's not enslaved, who is considered a legal person, and the discrimination that's coming from the law and also from people in society is a major issue that I'm focusing on in this particular book. And so if you were to read the book, you would see this back and forth between the push against free people of color and free people of color kind of pushing back against those who oppose their presence in the South. And so the example of Reed is important for a couple of reasons. One, because his experience highlights my larger argument about the situation of free people of color, that even though free people of color are facing increased discrimination from the colonial period going towards the Civil War, many of them are still able to use the freedom that they have to create lives for themselves, for their families, and seek certain opportunities that are unavailable to the enslaved population. And that, of course, is seen more so with free people of color who are considered well-to-do. Let's see here. So This is an image here of Reed's pension application from the American Revolution. And then this is the US federal census, which is a little bit awkward where Reed, he's in the middle. And it mentions that he has a white wife, which in this 1830 census, there's several free people of color in this particular county who are listed in that way. Now, I guess the second part of Reed's story, of course, has to do with why I got interested in the topic of free people of color and why I've decided to write 3 books about this topic. And so part of that is that I am a descendant of free people of color, and Reed actually is my ancestor. Reed and Betsy Skeeter are both my ancestors. And so probably I say 20, 25 years ago, I really got interested in doing family research and learned about the fact that I was a descendant of free people of color. So that's how I became familiar with the topic. And that interest eventually led to my academic interest. And of course, since that time, I've written a couple of books before this one that we're talking about today. So Hertford County, North Carolina's Free People of Color is a book that I self-published, and then North Carolina's Free People of Color, 1715 to 1885, came out in 2020 with LSU Press. And of course, now we have Beyond Slavery's Shadow, which came out in 2021 with UNC Press. So going back to Beyond Slavery's Shadow, if giving you a sense of why I wrote this book, kind of what I'm trying to get at with the book, but I also wanted to just provide you with a little bit of context. So created a few graphics here that hopefully you all can see pretty clearly. So this is a chart showing the different states in the South and along with Indian Territory and the District of Columbia and where they fit within the picture of free people of color in the South. So a lot of people, when they think about free people of color, they think about Louisiana, New Orleans, and Creoles of color. But as you can see in this chart, the population of free people of color is primarily situated in the Upper South, not in Louisiana. Louisiana is what, number 5 on the list, and almost more than half of that population is in New Orleans. But you can see Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina are states with large populations. Kentucky is actually still at the top half. Again, the Upper South, and then you've got states towards the bottom like Arkansas and Texas that have very small populations of free people of color. So there are many random counties throughout the South that actually have larger populations than some states when it comes to free people of color. And created a graph here that may give you a better visualization of how the population of free people of color is distributed. So the large blue part of the chart is representative of Maryland. The green part is Virginia, followed by North Carolina. So you can see from this chart that over half of the population is in Maryland and Virginia alone, which again, I don't think a lot of people, when they think about free people of color, recognize that. Also, I've created this chart with smaller localities to show you what the top 15 localities are as far as where free people of color are situated in the South. So some of these places you would expect, people who study this topic would be familiar that Baltimore County, which includes the city of Baltimore, had the largest population of free people of color especially through much of the 19th century. And then Orleans Parish, which is where New Orleans is located. Washington, D.C. as follows. And Washington, D.C. is a little bit strange because during this time, what we consider Washington, D.C. wasn't fully formed. So there's Georgetown and Washington or Washington County that are part of the District of Columbia. So if we threw Georgetown in there, then Washington, D.C. would be slightly ahead of Orleans Parish. And then you can see that a lot of the counties on this list are in the Upper South: Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, with the exception, of course, of Charleston, South Carolina, and Orleans Parish. Now, for as far as where does Kentucky fit into this picture, Louisville and Jefferson County, they're not on the list, but if I had expanded the list, they would be around number 25. So Louisville had slightly over 2,000, or Louisville and Jefferson County combined had over 2,000 free people of color during this time. And so that is where the plurality of free people of color in Kentucky were located. And if you remember the previous graphic, there are about 10,000 free people of color in the whole state of Kentucky by 1860. And following Jefferson County would have been Fayette County, which you would probably expect, which I think had around 600 plus free people of color. And then Franklin County and Boyle County had slightly over 400 according to the 1860 census. So hopefully that provides you with some general context of where free people of color are located. And you'll see in the book, if you get a chance to read it, that I try to some extent to be as representative as possible when talking about the experiences of free people of color. It's not always 100% possible because some localities just don't have the sources and records that you need to create a fully representative text, but I try to make that attempt. Now, for the rest of the presentation, I just want to go through and talk about the contents of the chapters of my book. And so what I've provided you with here is just a sampling of some of the individuals that I talk about. So the book is composed of 7 chapters: introduction and conclusion. And so the first chapter of the book focuses on the colonial period, or arguably colonial periods, because I talk about free people of color not only in the British colonies, but also in French Louisiana to some extent, and Spanish Florida. And of course, Louisiana during its colonial period actually goes back and forth between the French and the Spanish. And so one of the major issues that I try to deal with in this particular chapter, the first chapter of the book, is trying to explain where free people of color came from. And then the second issue that I'm interested in primarily is trying to discuss the diversity amongst free people of color, especially economic diversity, and how their different economic situations impacted their lives. And so, first of all, I should say, as far as free people of color and how they got their freedom, most free people of color either were born free because their mothers were free, and many families in the colonial period got their freedom because they were descended from Native American mothers or white mothers. And then the process of manumission, which is the legal process of an enslaved person becoming a free person. That's another way that people could end up being free persons of color, or other terms that would have been used, especially in the colonial period, such as free Negroes, mulattoes, etc. And so here in this image, I'm not sure how well you can see the newspaper article, but the newspaper article is about a free man of color, was listed in the ad as a mulatto, named Isaac Cromwell, and Anne Green, who was a white lady. And so they were a couple, both of them were in servitude, and they ran away together in the 1750s. There's actually another newspaper article that I, of course, don't have on the slide, where they ran away again. So they, in multiple cases, try to run away from servitude, get from under the power of the person who was holding them in servitude. And I think that illustrates their struggle as relatively poor people in the colonies, and they're located in Frederick County, Maryland. In contrast to their experience, I talk about a man named William Chavis, who was based in Granville County, North Carolina in the mid 1700s. Now, Chavis appears in a couple of records as a quote unquote free Negro, but his experience is much different than that of Cromwell. So he's a property holder. And as you can see in this image, this is a deed in which he's purchasing some land. I think at his height, he owned around 1,000 acres of land. He also enslaved other people. I think he enslaved at least around a dozen people at one time. He could read and write. He actually had a tavern, apparently. So he was pretty well-to-do in his community, especially for this mid-1700s period. And I try to use him along with other individuals to show this contrast between people who are in the servant class or poor free people of color and well-to-do free people of color like Chavis. And something that it's not reflected in these particular slides, but I bring into the conversation as well, is the issue of gender and how gender impacts the situations of different free people of color. Because it's one thing to be a poor person, but the experiences of poor men and poor women are often quite different, especially when we think about the apprenticeship system and how the apprenticeship system of the colonial period impacted women and their children and their ability to control their children. And the laws that were created in many colonies led to a lot of difficulties for poor women in particular when it came to controlling and keeping their families together. And my second chapter of the book moves on to the period of the American Revolution, or the multiple revolutions that are going on during the late 1700s. The general focus of that chapter is from about 1760 to right at 1800. So not everything falls into the exact timeline of the American Revolution. But the primary focus of that chapter is to discuss some of the changes that take place during this revolutionary moment when it comes to discussions about freedom and how freedom is viewed for people of color. One of the major changes that takes place is a reframing of manumission and its role in society. So by the 1760s, you have several religious sects, especially the Quakers, who are pushing against the enslavement of people of African descent and other people. And their work eventually leads to a liberalization of laws about manumission. So during the colonial period, several colonies passed laws that basically said, you can be manumitted, but if you're manumitted, you need to leave our colony. And so that movement is, or that set of rules are basically pushed away. And there's an opening for people who are enslaving other people, as well as enslaved people themselves, to seek freedom. And it's a much easier process. You don't have to leave the state, basically, which is a big deal. And so we see across the South, but especially in the upper South, in places like Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, this loosening and then this expansion in the population of free people of color. Also, what we see going along with that is an increased number of lawsuits from people who are being illegally held in slavery. So there seems to be a pretty significant number of people who were officially servants or apprentices who are being held beyond the terms in which they were supposed to be in service. And so one of those people was Phyllis, and Phyllis is a person of color who lived in Delaware and was being illegally held in the late 1700s. And so what she did is she sued in court the person who was holding her in bondage, and she was able to obtain the testimony of a woman who knew her family going back to her grandmother. And so the testimony explained that her grandmother was a person of East Indian descent, meaning that she had come from South Asia. And that evidence was used as a way for Phyllis to gain her freedom in Delaware. And there are other cases like that where free people of color are able to prove that either they had a white female ancestor or Native American female ancestor, or in more rare cases, an East Indian ancestor. And that was the path to freedom. And so that is something else that's also part of this larger increasing project of freedom for people of color during this time period. In the chapter, I also discuss some of the opportunities that free people of color were able to gain during this revolutionary period, as far as like economic opportunities, opportunities for movement, things like that. And I also talk about the beginnings of pushback on the liberation of all of these people. And so I discussed the case of Benjamin Banneker. I'm sure many of you have heard of Benjamin Banneker, and you probably would know about Banneker for the almanac that is pictured in the on the screen. And so, of course, that's one of his major accomplishments. His scientific accomplishments are noted throughout the early United States, but also Banneker is I would say, an early advocate for the right of people of color, both free and enslaved. So he publicly makes statements about what he sees as, I guess, the conflict of interest, or maybe even more just like internal conflict within the United States between people who are advocating for freedom and at the same time holding other people in bondage. And so he particularly targets Thomas Jefferson in his conversations about this topic. So there's a long newspaper article that he publishes basically calling out Thomas Jefferson and the other so-called founders. Now, the third chapter of my book goes deeper into this backlash that takes place in response to the growing number of free people of color throughout the South. And so in that chapter, I discuss the numerous laws that are passed in the Southern states trying to curb manumission and also limit the rights of free people of color. So, I mean, there are all kinds of laws, from laws that try to control the movements of free people of color across state boundaries, to taking away the right of free men of color to vote, which free men of color could vote in a few states. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, one of the key examples I think about is Maryland, which would have been pretty significant because there were so many free people of color there. Maryland in the late 1790s allowed free men of color to vote, but by the early 1800s, that first decade, the party of Thomas Jefferson, Jeffersonian Republicans, pushed free people of color out of the franchise. They could no longer vote because free people of color were viewed as their political opponents or supporters of their political opponents, the Federalists, basically. So they started advocating for the white vote as a way to so-called cleanse the vote and make, and open up opportunities to white men, because basically what the situation was, there were property qualifications. So free men of color who could meet property qualifications could vote, but there were white men who couldn't make those property qualifications and they could not vote. So you had this, what they perceived as an imbalance, and they wanted to correct that. But moving on from the voting issue, that's just one of many topics that came up for debate during this time period as a way to curb the rights of free people of color. Also, a interesting conversation took place around the idea of colonization as a way to deal with free people of color. So basically, the plan was to send free people of color out of the United States and place them somewhere else. And it was debated at one time where that would be, whether it might be Haiti or somewhere else in the Caribbean or Africa. And so Liberia eventually becomes one of the primary destinations for free people of color. Some free people of color move to Haiti, Liberia, and these other places voluntarily. Others are required to as part of their agreements when it comes to manumission. So a manumission document, maybe a will or something like that, would state that in order for these enslaved people to become free, they would have to go and leave the United States. And so the two people who are pictured on the screen, Joseph Jenkins Roberts and Jane Waring Roberts, were from Virginia, and they ended up in Liberia. Joseph Roberts became the first president of Liberia a little bit later. Now, it seems that at least Joseph Jenkins Roberts left for a slightly more complicated reason. So I think he saw Africa as a way, as a place where he could do things that he couldn't do in the United States, maybe as far as businesses was concerned, and definitely politically. He could do more in Liberia than he could in the United States. But at the same time, I think he also saw Liberia as a financial opportunity. He came from a somewhat well-to-do family in Virginia. And so he started basically like this shipping business between the United States and Liberia with at least one other free person of color. Whereas some free people of color are really leaving the United States because that's the only opportunity for them. So I talk about that topic a little bit in this chapter. Now, moving on to the fourth chapter of the book, I'm still sticking to this same time period, about 1800, 1830, but I focus more on what free people of color are trying to do here in the United States to benefit themselves and build community in the face of all of this backlash. And so one of the major issues that comes up during the time is segregation in churches. And so there's a push in the early 1800s, late 1700s to segregate churches and put free people of color and enslaved people either in a different part of church or to take away their ability to have influence in the church. Because in this early 1800s period, there are actually free men of color in particular, but also some women who are preaching to mixed congregations of people of color and white people, and sometimes as the primary minister. And so there are individuals who are trying to push back against that. And in response to the pushback, some free people of color decide that they need to create their own churches and religious institutions. And so one of those institutions is Bethel Church in Baltimore, Maryland. And you can see this pictures, I think, from the 1840s, so a little bit after the time period that I'm focused on in the chapter, but it just gives you a sense of what the church looked like inside and what these people are trying to achieve during this time period. So churches are big. Also, education is a major focus for free people of color in this early 1800s period. Daniel Coker was located in Baltimore as well and set up a school for free children of color. And these schools are popping up everywhere. I mean, there are schools for free people of color in Charleston, in Delaware. Some of them are being created by free people of color themselves. Some white people are also involved in the creation of schools for people of color, especially those who are aligned with the earlier manumission movement and other organizations that are either anti-slavery leaning or looking to help improve their overall society. Like Coker actually leaves the United States at some point and goes to Africa as well. So he clearly was I guess, not excited about what was going on here during that time period, even as he's trying to create opportunity for other people. this image is a newspaper ad for a business owned by Amelia Shadd, who's a free woman of color based in Wilmington, Delaware. She has an oyster hotel. And so her hotel, of course, serves all different types of food, which she lists in the ad. And she's also encouraging people to visit her because she's going to provide them with great service. And there are several free women of color that I found in different cities across the South who have similar establishments, and they talk about the food and how great the food is and comfortable lodging and all that. So we can see this entrepreneurship amongst free people of color that is going alongside that backlash that is happening in response to the increase in manumissions. Now, after discussing the early 1800s, that about 1800 to 1830 period, I move on to the book's 5th chapter, which starts off discussing the 1831 Nat Turner Rebellion and the impacts on free people of color because of the rebellion. Now, I think most historians who study the time period that I'm looking at would suggest that this Nat Turner Rebellion is a point of a major shift in the way that free people of color and the enslaved population are policed across the South. I think that it's an important moment, but I'm arguing maybe instead that it's what we see in 1831 and afterwards is more of a continuation of the patterns that had started much earlier, the targeting of free people of color legally and also through just daily discriminatory practices. The laws that we see passed after the rebellion aren't new ideas in 1831, basically. They're ideas that often had failed to be implemented in earlier times, and once 1831 and this later period happened, then politicians are able to implement these proposals that they had failed to implement earlier. And so in this early part of the chapter, as I mentioned, I talk about the rebellion, and one of the observers of the rebellion is Willis Augustus Hodges, who lives in Virginia in the 1830s. And he's located, I'm going to say, maybe about 100 miles away from the rebellion. So he's not right there in Southampton County, Virginia at the time, but he's a couple counties over. And he discusses in some newspaper articles that are published actually after the Civil War what happens to him and the people in his community. And he describes some of the localized violence that takes place in his community against free people of color and the enslaved population, how white people in his community decide to enforce laws that had not been enforced regularly against free people of color. They're jailing free people of color, searching houses, and things of that nature. So that's what happens in that with that immediate reaction. The rest of the chapter, I kind of focus on a few individual stories, but also the larger picture of how the law is becoming more extreme and how political extremists in the South continue to target free people of color as a way to, in many ways, to demonstrate how tough they can be on the issue of slavery. So they can't actually make slavery that much worse. So I think they kind of target free people of color as a way to show that they're being tough without, actually making a serious impact. And also there's an increasing organized white supremacist voice in this later antebellum period. And so I think they're also trying to appease that as well. Another individual that comes up in the chapter, I just mentioned him, is Leonard Grimes. He's also based in Virginia, but he's more in the Northern Virginia area, so right outside of Washington, D.C. And he kind of gets pulled into some of this, I guess, confusion of the moment when it comes to being tough on the issue of slavery. And so he is arrested for trying to help a group of enslaved people run away in Loudoun County, Virginia. And he ends up in the state penitentiary for a few years as a result of that. He, after getting out of the penitentiary, immediately leaves Virginia, doesn't come back, and moves up to the Northeast, New England, and becomes a minister and continues anti-slavery activities there. So the book continues on past after this Nat Turner period. Like I said, I talk about the laws that have developed, more of the discrimination. Then I return to the theme of what free people of color are able to do despite the increasing pressures. And so I'm looking at that from, say, approximately 1830 to around 1860. And so one of the individuals that I talk about in that chapter is Daniel Payne. And Payne is originally from South Carolina, but ends up in Baltimore, Maryland, in the antebellum period. And he's doing a lot of different things for that community. He's serving as a minister in the AME church, but he's also a teacher and I guess you could say a social organizer. So he's involved in like these beneficial societies that help people of color with basic things like burial, because in this time period, the people of color have to figure out, where are we going to bury our dead? So he's involved in that process. Washington Spradling is another individual I discussed. He's from Louisville, and he is a tradesman who is able to accumulate quite a bit of money, and he's well respected in Louisville, and he uses his wealth to help enslaved people in his community gain their freedom. So he loans out a lot of money. He claims that he helped free several dozen people. Some people paid him back and other people didn't. But you can see how he's a pretty successful person. And then he's able to take that wealth and help other people and have a larger influence in his community. So he's around in this 1830s to 1860s period. And then another example I discuss in the book is John Patterson Sampson. Now, John Patterson Sampson's father had a business in Wilmington, North Carolina, where he grew up, and was pretty successful and was able to send some of his children to college. So in North Carolina, there was no college that people of color could attend during this antebellum period. So John Patterson Sampson and another brother actually had to go to the North and attend college there. I think he attended college in Massachusetts, and then his brother went to Oberlin. So I was able to find a few other examples of free people of color who went to college, which was rare for anybody at this time period. So the final chapter of the book is focused on the Civil War in the South, the free people of color's experiences. So the chapter is basically divided into two parts. One part is looking at the experiences of free people of color under the rebel governments. So basically, south of Kentucky, Virginia, south, that region. And I discuss their struggles under that government. Some cases, there's some collaboration between some free people of color who are opportunists. And then the second part focuses on what free people of color are doing in areas of the South under US control. And one of the major activities of free people of color during this time is serving in the military. And so Moses Hammond is one of those individuals who served in the US military during this time. He's originally from Maryland, joins the Army. He ends up working in a military hospital through much of his service during the war. Another person that I focus on in this final chapter of the book is Mary Smith Peake. So Mary Smith Peake is a Virginia native. She was able to get education during the antebellum period by actually leaving the state of Virginia and coming back. And so during the war, her part of Virginia is taken over by U.S. forces, and she sets up a school for the recently freed people to help them just learn basic writing, reading skills, how to count, things like that. So she's teaching adults and children and makes a major contribution to her community that way. And then the book concludes with a short discussion of what happens to free people of color following the Civil War. And the images that you see, there's Oscar Dunn and PBS Pinchback, who are some of the more successful free people of color in the post-Civil War era. Both of them end up serving as lieutenant governors of Louisiana, and at one time or another, they also are considered the quote unquote acting governor of Louisiana. There's a lot of political scandal and such going on in that state during the time, and that's how they end up in those positions. But along with these accomplished individuals like Dunn and Pinchback, I also try to highlight some of the more, or try to highlight more important conclusions about the influence of free people of color in that post-Civil War moment, and try to also show or explain how we might learn something about the present moment from the experiences of free people of color. So that's where I end the book, and I'm going to stop my presentation there. If you're interested in the book and want to get a copy, UNC Press, who's the publisher, is offering 40% off, and the code you can see is on the screen, 01D8H40. And I checked it this morning. It worked this morning. So thank you all, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. I can't wait to. So I know we already have a couple of questions that have come in. And maybe Stephanie or somebody, would you mind copying that discount code into the chat for us? I just don't want that to go away. So I will bring up our questions that have come in. So Larry wanted to find out, why did Maryland have such a large number of free people of color?
So I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. One, Maryland's economy. So Maryland, very early on in the national period, becomes a place where there's an export of enslaved people. And so slavery's significance in the state more generally was on the decline. Different types of crops were being grown in Maryland. Also, I think compared to the other southern states, the Quakers and the larger anti-slavery manumission movement are strongest in Maryland. They're right beside Pennsylvania, where a lot of this early activity is taking place. So there's a lot of back and forth between people in Baltimore, between Baltimore and Philadelphia, when it comes to these ideas about how to help enslaved people become free. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And you could say that Virginia, Delaware are benefiting from that same larger conversation in that region. Whereas in the Deep South, I think they're making stronger moves to become more entrenched in slavery and not less so.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just popped up a couple of artifacts from the KHS collection that you guys might want to take a look at some point. Some portraits of Dennis and Diademia Durham, some free Kentuckians of color who are very successful. And we are fortunate to have their portraits in our collection. Jody wanted to know, she said, I noticed in the article about Isaac Cromwell and Anne Green that the article said that Cromwell pretends to be married. Would they have been able to be legally married?
Yeah, so I think the quick answer in that situation is no. It depends on the state. Some states, they or colonies at this time, excuse me, um, have North Carolina, I think about this in particular, has a law that basically discourages these type of relationships. Well, you get fined if you are in one of these relationships, but it's not technically illegal. Whereas in other states, it is technically illegal, and so that's what's going on there. But as you can see with that example, as well as the example that I discussed at the beginning of the conversation, despite the fact that it's supposed to be illegal for these relationships to exist, people are still engaging in them. And many times communities they just kind of accept them. They're not excited about it. They're not encouraging the behavior, but they know it's happening, and what are they going to do? I think in my other book, about North Carolina, I talk about a particular example I think highlights the reason that there was some acceptance for these relationships. And that was when children are produced, the government doesn't want any business taking care of these children, right? They'd rather have the family together than having to put these people on the welfare rolls and deal with them. So I think that's also important.
Let's see. And Tom asked, were a disproportionate percentage of free people of color artisans as opposed to farmers?
I guess it depends on where you're looking at. So in the cities, of course, you're going to see more artisans than you might see farmers. But more generally, yeah, I would say the majority of free people of color are common laborers, farmers, people who are doing domestic work, things of that nature. And you can see a real contrast between free people of color in the upper South, where you have this large number of people who've been manumitted, versus those who live in, say, New Orleans. So free people of color in New Orleans, Louisiana, even South Carolina tend to be much more wealthy than those who are in the upper South on average. You can think about it as far as like the importance of slavery to the economies of each of these places as well. So the boom states of the time are in the deep South, right? That's where the opportunity is. But it's also where slavery is strongest. So there are these small populations of free people of color in the lower South, but they also do tend to be wealthier on average because they're planters or they're artisans in this expanding region. Whereas, people who are in the upper South are in locations that are often losing population.
Thank you. Make sure I don't miss any here. Jody asked another question. She asks, a wide spectrum, I'm sure, but in general, are there any notable differences between how free people of color held in bondage? Jody, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, of would these have been sometimes family members, extended family members? Do you notice any difference with the sale, or were there any? I was just curious about. Do you notice any differences in behavior?
What, as far as like free people of color who are slaveholders, or?
Correct, or slaveholders versus, say, white families who are slaveholders.
Right. Yeah. There's a mix. So there are definitely a significant number of free people of color who are holding other people in bondage because those are their family members. And what happens is that in that early 1800s period, when I'm talking about this backlash, many of the liberal laws about manumission are replaced with more strict laws. And some of the states or state governments require that if you're freed, you have to leave again, like it was in the colonial period. or you need to post a bond in order for somebody to be freed. And so as a result, some individuals would purchase their family members and just keep them enslaved versus going through that process. And I think what happens is a lot of that is local. And as far as how that works, because there's some places where, yeah, you're supposed to have a bond, but we don't really care. Or, yeah, there's a law that says you need to leave, but we're not really paying attention to that. That's widespread. But at the same time, there's some individual certain local officials who are trying to enforce the law, or they enforce the law on certain people, and so they have to make alternative choices. And I'm sure there's a lot of confusion amongst free people of color about what is legal and what's not and how all these things work. But at the same time, there, especially in the Deep South, I would say more than anywhere else, there are free people of color who are definitely involved in holding other people as slaves for profit. That's their business. That's how they got wealthy, and that's how they plan on staying wealthy. And so that's how they operate. And I've seen runaway slave ads posted by free people of color. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, if there are any more questions, please feel free to go ahead and pop those up into the chat if you would like to. But thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, Dr. Milteer. This was wonderful. And again, I'm really looking forward to reading the book. You did mention the number of Black men who served in the Civil War with the Union forces, and so I'm gonna take an opportunity and just go ahead and shamelessly plug a program later this year. Dr. Holly Pinheiro from Furman University is going to be with us in June, talking about that very subject. He's got a book coming out called "The Family Civil War: Black Soldiers and the Fight for Racial Justice," and it'll be, I think he did quite a bit of research on Camp Nelson, just over in Jessamine County. So we're gonna delve into that topic some more. So, and we'd love to have you join us for that, Dr. Milteer. I'm sure that can be some interesting discussion there. So, all right. Well, and Jody says, thank you so much for the fascinating presentation. And again, please copy down that discount code and go order a copy of Dr. Milteer's book from UNC Press. And Stuart also says, thank you for joining us. So guys, wherever you are, be safe. Oh, here's Stephanie. Super interesting research. Oh, I forgot. We are excited to welcome you as a KHS Research Fellow in the coming months. So I hope you're coming. You'll get to be there in person. Yay! Okay. That's wonderful. So maybe we'll get to talk to you again about the research you're doing as a fellow. So that's very exciting. All right, guys, stay safe, stay warm. And I will see you all again next month for First Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Dr. Milteer, thank you again.
Oh, no problem.
Y'all have a great day.